Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for being here with us tonight, for finding your way here to explore this fascinating world of mushrooms and fungi. John, yeah, Lisa, if you guys want to turn your videos on. Thank you for being here for our 5th talk in our Love Where You Live series titled Mushroom and Fungi, Stories from the Wild. So before we begin, let's take a communal deep breath together. So I invite you to close your eyes. Relax into this moment. Relax your shoulders, relax your jaw. Relax that space between your eyebrows. And take a deep breath in through your nose. Open your mouth, exhale. And open your eyes if you haven't already. Well, thank you guys for taking that moment with us and to begin our journey with John and Deb, who are here with us tonight. So I hope we are all comfortable, sitting back, enjoying our favorite beverage of choice. My name's Allie Gustafson, here with KS Wild, and I'm your community organizer. And with me here tonight, and who is co-sponsoring this event, is Lisa James, Executive Director with Friends of the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument. So KS Wild, we work to protect and restore the wildlands of the Klamath-Siskiyou region of southwestern Oregon and northwestern California. We do that through science-based land and water community activism, which is all of you guys, and policy work. And I want to remind you all that our next talk in our Love Where You Live series will be on March 31st. So tune in with us next month. And that is going to be on butterflies and moss. Walk softly and carry a big net. And that's going to be with Dana Ross. He's an entomologist and also a frequent teacher at the Siskiyou Field Institute. So don't miss that. You can sign up on our website, kswild.org. So with that, I would like to now introduce our co-sponsor and co-host for this evening, Lisa James with the Friends of the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument. Thank you so much for co-sponsoring with us, and I'll now hand it over to you.
Thank you, Allie. I'm the executive director. I'm also the bookkeeper. I'm everything. We have one staff person part-time, but we are a really dedicated, volunteer-driven nonprofit. The Friends of the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument are 20 years old this year. And the monument turned 20 last year, and their founding was a year after that. So it's pretty impactful, a lot of the work that we've been able to do to protect restoration work, conservation advocacy, and we do that through programs, Hike and Learns, and next month we have our big annual science research symposium on March 18th. So we want to join everyone and say thank you for spending your night with us tonight. And we want to do just a little brief land acknowledgement. The monument is now 114,000 acres in Northern California and Southern Oregon. And we overlap with the focus of KS Wild. It's been a really great partnership, Allie, and everybody have been great to work with. But we wanted to acknowledge the traditional caretakers of the lands that, that came first. And it depends on who you ask and what records you look at. But there are bands of tribes who resided in, who traveled through and utilized the lands of the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument. And they would include the Takelma, the Klamath, the Shasta, the Quartz Valley Ranchera, Cow Creek tribe, the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz, and even some of the Coquille from on the coast, the Warm Springs, and Umatilla Indians. So we're constantly learning. That's why we sponsor and we're announcing our student research grant. So we'll be giving a grant for some students to conduct some research. Thank you so much for letting us share your evening. I'm really excited about the program.
Thanks, Lisa. And we have a couple links if you'd like to learn more. We'll put them in the chat box. Also, in the chat box, let's hear from you all. So you just heard from us where we are calling in from, Southern Oregon, Ashland, Oregon. And so find your way to the chat box. It's either at the top of your screen or at the bottom. And let us know where you are zooming in from tonight. It's really fun. Let's see if we're getting any chats coming in. Cool, yeah, California. Hi, Kate from Ashland. Thanks for starting us off. We have people from all over the state, from Bend, up there in Portland, Howdy Hot Tide, they're in Talents. We have lots of locals. So this is so fun. So we can all see this. So thank you all for being here tonight. I want to just let you guys know of a few reminders. So we are recording this session, so you can view this at a later date if you'd like, or share with your friends. And we are also saving time at the end for Q&A. So if you have a question, use the Q&A box, not the chat box, because I will not be monitoring the chat for questions. So if you have a question, type them into the Q&A box, and we will get to them at the end as much as we can when with the time that we have. We'll get to as many as we can. And if you're having technical problems or if it freezes, just go ahead and log back out and click that link again, and that'll get you back into the event. Well, I think that's it for now. So now I would like to introduce our guest speakers that we have with us tonight. So first up, we have John Villela with the Siskiyou Biosurvey. And our second guest speaker is Deb Van Poolen with Biodiversity Arts. So I'm so excited to have you guys both here with us tonight. And John will begin the presentation for us today. So I'll go ahead and stop my share and hand it over to you, John. Thank you so much.
Okay, can everybody see my, there we go. Can everyone see my presentation there? How's that look, Allie?
Yes. Yep, looks great, John.
Okay, well then I'll begin then. First of all, I'd like to just say thanks to KS Wild and the Friends of the Cascade Siskiyou Monument for having me on here to chat with you all about mushrooms, fungus, lichens, and the fungal kingdom in general. This is going to be, it's hard to cram it all in into 1 hour, but I'm really excited to share with you all a passion that I have for these organisms. And the first slide here is sort of displaying a typical basket that you might, if you're out foraging, some of the different species that you might encounter. When you're out in the fall time foraging for mushrooms. And as you can see here, there's quite a diversity of different forms and shapes, different colors, and all of these are different forms of fungus. And so what I'm going to be talking to you about tonight is what is a mushroom, what is a fungus. I'm going to talk a little bit about the ecological roles that these organisms play in our forest, focusing on the forest ecosystem. At the end, I'll talk a little bit about lichens. I'll say some names and try to do some identifying some of the things on the screen. In general, try to keep it accessible for everyone and present it in a way that but limits the amount of Latin or the amount of jargon, we can definitely go there if we need to. So so this is a typical kind of different types of mushrooms that you might find, and mushrooms that we have in our forests around here that we are a variety of different sizes. You can see we've got some pictures here of some larger species like the Sporasis that I've got on my head there in the upper left, which is a giant fruiting body of a mushroom. The middle picture here is showing a little tiny Mycena that is a decomposer of needles. And this particular one is, you can see a Doug fir needle in the picture there for scale. So you can see how small that species is. And then in the bottom right, a friend of mine there with posing next to a large Leccinum, a bolete family mushroom. So there's a wide variety of different sizes that mushrooms come in and fruit in. But in general, in fact, all mushrooms are actually serving a similar purpose, which is to create the spores, which are released from the mushroom. And that's basically like the seed of the mushroom that will go out and propagate new mushrooms out in the environment. I'm going to go through this slide and sort of talk about this because this is a pretty important concept to understand when you're thinking about fungi and their roles in the environment. First off, we'll start at the top, and when the spores are released from the cap of the mushroom or from the fruiting body of the mushroom, they float out into the environment, and spores are microscopic, and they are small enough that they can become part of the aerial plankton, which is floating around us. In fact, every breath you take, you're breathing in fungal spores, and they're microscopic and invisible to us, to the naked eye. But when they float out into the environment, they will eventually settle somewhere, and hopefully they'll land in a place where they can begin the process of starting a new colony of fungus. And so in the case of, in this image, you can see once the spores land in the environment, then they'll start to germinate, and then they'll start to produce their fungal hyphae, which grows a slight amount out into the environment. And if a spore germinates and it starts to grow out into the environment, it very quickly needs to encounter another spore that's also germinated. And if it doesn't, it will just die, and that spore will have not succeeded in propagating a new mushroom. But if it does happen if these fungal hyphae will come into contact with each other, which we have here in the mating of the compatible hyphae, at that point, then we get a more robust form of this thread material, which starts to grow and will grow out into the soil. And at that phase, this is really the bulk of the time that the fungus has. It's surviving underneath the soil or in the substrate, and it's growing out, and it's in the feeding stage. So in this point, it's really gathering nutrients, and it's growing, and this network is developing. And as time goes on, and as this network develops, and as enough nutrients are gathered, and then at that point, there's a couple of different things that can happen. Sometimes the mushrooms will start a small, what they call the imperfect stage, which is sort of like a mold where it's reproducing via spore, but the spores are all genetically similar to each other. But then these spores can also go out into the environment and germinate and become part of the fungal network. Also, what can happen is you can get this network that starts to aggregate together and form more of a mass, which is called a sclerotia. And that's basically the beginnings of what will become a mushroom. So the sclerotia forms, it's compacted material, but if you encounter a sclerotia and you cut it open, for instance, the inside will be all similar. There's not going to be any differentiated tissue in there. It's just a fungal mass that's a compacted mass of hyphae. And this can be a resting form for the fungus as it's developing. But eventually, if there's the right environmental triggers, the sclerotia or the hyphal network will start to form a primordial mushroom or a primordial fruit body. And that's depicted here at about 4 o'clock on this circle here. And this is what we call a mushroom button. And this is different from a sclerotia in that it's still small, but if you were to cut it open and look at it, you would start to see some small gills and sort of the tissue starting to differentiate into the mushroom form. So at that point, going from there around this circle here, when you get this environmental trigger that forms the mushroom, then it will usually grow relatively rapidly from this primordial stage, and the gills will form in the cap eventually as it's growing. Once the cap gets large enough and the gills form and the spores are mature, then the cap will expand and you'll have the gill surface exposed. And then it's at that point that the spores are released into the environment, completing the life cycle of the mushroom. So this is a generalized image here, but this is basically the life cycle of all of the mushrooms that you see out there in all their various forms are there to produce the spores. And an important point to bring up here is that as this mushroom is growing, the stalk will expand and the mushroom will grow up. And as it's growing, it's basically trying to get up above the boundary layer of air. So if air is moving across the landscape, as you move down closer to the ground level, the air moves slower and slower to the point where at the actual surface of the ground, there's virtually no air movement. And so these mushrooms are growing up in order to get above, and so that when they release the spores, they're into the airstream, and then they're able to move about in that way and get blown around. So that's a generalized image here for what the mushrooms are doing. Now, if we look at the microscopic level, these are a couple of images that depict the spores themselves. And if we start in the upper left-hand image of this slide, what you're seeing here, the blue areas are a cross-section of a gill. So you can imagine each one of those blue stripes is an actual gill on the underside of the mushroom. And then on the surface of the gills, you have the spores being produced. And the spores are produced in what are called basidia, which are club-like structures that hold the spores on the outside of them. And then the spores are released into this air pocket in between the gills. So on the right is a close-up image here with the B depicting the basidia, which is the club-like structure, and then the S being the spores born on the outside of this club-like structure. So this is one of the major types of mushrooms, which we call Basidiomycetes, and they are all of the mushrooms that produce their spores on a club-like structure. The other major group, which are the cup fungi, and this includes most of the lichens are cup fungi as well. The cup fungi, which are depicted on the bottom half of this slide, they have a different structure for producing their spores. Their spores are produced in basically a long tube, a series of long tubes all stacked up against each other, which you can see depicted here in the bottom left of the slide. And then as the spores mature, they get forcibly ejected out of the tip of this tube, which is called an asci or ascus, and then the plural is asci. And that these spores are forcibly ejected out of the tip of the tube. And so this is a different form of spore production. And these are the microscopic characteristics that differentiate the two major groups of fungi, which you'll find as terrestrial fungi in our forests. Okay, so that's a lot of information and a lot of vocabulary, but now we're going to get into looking at some of the different mushrooms and what their ecological roles are in the environment. So the first major group, I'm going to talk about 3 different types of mushrooms, and these are differentiated on their feeding strategies. And so fungus they're heterotrophic organisms. In other words, they need to get nutrients from their environment. Unlike a plant, they can't produce their own nutrients. Plants are able to use the sun to photosynthesize, and then they can produce their own energy, but mushrooms have to get it, fungus have to get it from their environment. So what the fungus do is that they grow out into their food. So, animals will take food in and digest it internally. Fungus will actually grow into their food as this network of hyphal material, which is this white cottony material here. And each thread of cotton is its own tubular structure. And at the end of the tube, the mushroom will exude digestive enzymes and then grow into that area and then reabsorb those nutrients. And so they're unique in this way that they will feed by growing into their food. So the first major group is called the mycorrhizal fungi. And in this case, these are fungi that live in the soil and they grow out into the soil, but not only do they gather nutrients from the soil, but they also hook their fungal material into the roots of plants. And here you can see an image of the soil where the fungal material is growing around a root. And I want to just point out here that there's a large difference in size between the fungal material and the smallest roots on a plant. The fungal hyphae is much smaller in diameter than any of the roots that it's coming in contact with. And that allows it to very efficiently be able to grow into the soil and gather nutrients. And then it transports those nutrients back, and because it's hooked into the roots, it actually gives those nutrients to the tree or plant. And the plant will also because it can gather nutrients through photosynthesis, it will transport sugars and carbohydrates and such down into the root system and give it to the fungus. And so there's this exchange of nutrients that's happening between the fungus and the plant. And all of our plants that you find in the forest have this symbiotic relationship with a fungus that allows it to gather nutrients through the soil. Here's an image which is from a paper that's from some local folks here, local mycologists. And this is demonstrating some of the different forms that this mycorrhizal connection will exhibit. You have, as the mushroom colonizes the root tips, the plant reacts by changing its morphology, and those morphological differences can be detected and can actually tell you in a way what mushrooms are in the environment, even if they're not fruiting at the moment, because they each infect the roots and then produce a different morphological characteristic. So this is a very important and ancient symbiotic relationship between plants and fungus. And most of the mushrooms that you see growing out of soil are of this type. They're the mycorrhizal fungi. A great example of a mycorrhizal fungus is the golden chanterelle. And as you may know, chanterelles are not a mushroom that you can cultivate in an agricultural setting. And the reason is because they are mycorrhizal mushrooms and they are connected into the trees. You need to have an intact forest where the trees are existing and the fungus is existing in this mycorrhizal symbiosis with the trees. And so whenever you are eating chanterelles, even if you bought them in Safeway, they are all wildcrafted and foraged out of our forests. Chanterelles are just one of thousands of different fungi out there that are mycorrhizal fungi. Now, another really interesting component to this whole symbiotic relationship is that there are certain plants which have figured out how to basically give up on photosynthesizing themselves, and rather they connect into this network between the trees and the mushrooms, and they are able to, in a way, parasitize this relationship that exists between the mushrooms and the trees. And what I have depicted here is an example of just such a plant. In the upper right, you'll see this plant. This is Allotropa, which is known as the candy stripe. And this, as you'll notice in this picture, there's no green on this plant. This plant does not produce its own chlorophyll. It does not get energy from the sun, but rather it connects its roots in between the mushroom and the tree. And in the case of Allotropa, it's very interesting because this plant is a symbiotic partner that's an obligate symbiont with Matsutake mushrooms. And so basically you can have the mycorrhizal relationship between the tree and the Matsutake. You can have that without the candy stripe, but the candy stripe needs to have Matsutake. That's what it is growing with. And so as a result of that, it's if you know about this, you can actually look for Matsutakes in the middle of the summer, because every time you find a patch of Allotropa, if you go back and the mushrooms are fruiting, you have a good chance of finding the Matsutake because it's going to be growing with it. So the candy stripe is a parasite on the Matsutake mushroom. And the Matsutake is connected into the roots of various different conifers, such as Doug fir or pine, that sort of a thing. That's just a little tip there for finding Matsutake. Okay. Now, another group of fungi that are important in our forests are the coral mushrooms. And here we have a picture of one of the different corals. I chose coral mushrooms to talk about in this next segment because in the Pacific Northwest, we have the highest diversity of coral mushrooms in the world, and we get quite a variety of different forms and colors, such as this yellow one here. There's some bright pink coral mushrooms like the Romeria Spora, and even purple Romerias, this is a very rare species which This picture is from the Umpqua, the Iroquois Divide area, where there's a few populations of this that we know of. In general, a rare mushroom, but a beautiful one, as you can see here. So in our region, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 or so different Ramaria mushrooms, and we are the world hotspot for the coral mushrooms. Okay, so let's see, and again, many different type of mushrooms that are mycorrhizal mushrooms, but I'm not going to talk about them all tonight. The next group that I want to talk about are the Decomposer mushrooms. Now, these mushrooms, so rather than hooking into the roots of the trees and getting their sugar and their carbon in that, the Decomposer mushrooms live off of their fungal hyphae is down in dead material. So they're using a number of different things. It can be wood, it can be leaves, it can be pine cones, you know, that sort of a thing. But the Decomposer mushrooms, and many of them are types like the shelf fungi, which are depicted here in the upper right. Morels are an example of a decomposer fungus. A variety of the cup fungi, like the one here growing on cedar leaves, and even some mushrooms that grow on other mushrooms, which is what you see here. You have a rushla mushroom, and then right next to it, you have some of these decomposed mushrooms that grow out of an old stalk of a rushla. And I'm going to talk about those soon. But first, I want to highlight one of our one of the really unique species for the Pacific Northwest, which is the noble polypore. And this is the world's largest shelf mushroom, Bridgiaparis Noblessimus. It grows on noble fir, as the name implies, but also on a number of other different conifers. And this is a really amazing mushroom. There's been the biggest one, I think, that they found is somewhere near 300 pounds. And this thing can grow to be several feet across, 4 to 5 feet across. And it's just a beautiful shelf mushroom. And they grow there. It's a perennial conch that grows and continues to get bigger every year. As it's growing, because it's grows so big and sticks around in the environment for so long, there's actually moss and liverworts and algae that will grow on the upper surface of it. And there's a whole unique community of organisms that are living on the upper surface of this mushroom. And so this is a rare species, and so a rare species, to find fruit is pretty rare. There's maybe 50 known sites or something in the Pacific Northwest of it in fruit. Recent studies have looked at they did some core samples into trees and then did some genetic analysis to see if it's in there. And they found that this mushroom is more widespread in the environment than we thought previously, based on the fact that you can find the fungal mycelium inside of the trees. But to find it in fruit is very rare. And we have it that grows from Northern California up into Washington. Another really interesting decomposer mushroom has a very unique form, which is this mushroom called Dendrocalibia. Dendrocalibia is a decomposer of other mushrooms. It grows on rush, which is a common mycorrhizal mushroom, probably the most common mycorrhizal mushroom in our forest. And as these large mushrooms start to decompose, then growing out of them, oftentimes you will find this very unique small species, Dendrocalibia, and it has this very unique structure to it, which are these side branches. It's one of the few mushrooms that we know of that actually produces side branches like this. And so it's pretty small, but once you find it, you know that that's it. And, here is a extremely rare species. This is Dendrocalibia that is a species that's new to science, and it is originally only known from one site in Santa Cruz Mountains down in California. Although we recently found it around Murphy out in the Applegate area. So the more you look, the more you find, and sometimes you end up finding some really interesting species. So this one is different. It has side branches which are smaller and not quite as robust as the other form. And it also has a slightly different form of its sclerotia. So this is that resting form. The Pycnomerella has a more wrinkled sclerotia than the Dendrocalibia racemosa. So this is another example of a unique decomposer mushroom. And here's another example of a kind of a unique species, which decomposer mushrooms will grow on wood. They'll grow on soil, on leaves, on cones, and that sort of thing. There are even species which decompose bone. In this particular species, Onagina corvina, it only decomposes the bones of birds. And so, as you can see in this picture, if you look right in the middle of the beak here, you can see a little tiny mushroom growing out of there, and that's this species. And there's a slightly blurry, but a close-up version of that. This species is unique in the fact that it doesn't produce spores on the underside. You might think that this would be a gilled fungus based on the shape of it, but it actually will, the cap decomposes and produces these conidia spores that come out of the top of it. And so this is a very unique species, and it's one of the only species that you'll find growing directly out of bone. And we've got two species in our region. We've got this one, which grows out of bird bones, and then there's another one that grows off of shed hooves of horses and that sort of a thing. And these are rare to find, but are pretty unique species. So I'm trying to show some examples of some unique types of mushrooms here, rather than trying to talk about every single one. So yeah, so this is a really unique type of mushroom here. Okay, so the decomposer mushrooms many of them are cultivated and many of them are considered medicinal. And in this slide, I'm showing an Asian species of reishi. This is the Ganoderma lucidum, which has the common name, the mushroom of immortality. This is one of the most widely used medicinal mushrooms in Eastern Asia. And we have our own version of it here. There's a couple of different species that grow in our forests. They look very similar. They're known as the varnish conchs, and they are a annual conch, grow as a shelf, new shelf every year. And this is a very widely cultivated type of mushroom that is used medicinally. Another commonly cultivated species, and these grow in the wild around here. This is a choice edible. These are Hirisium, which is the lion's mane, and a close-up picture here on the left, and then a more a further back picture there showing it growing out of a log that has fallen down on the ground. This is a great one around here. It likes to grow on big logs in our forest. It's somewhat common around here, and it's a widely sought after edible. It will also grow on standing snags, and oftentimes you can see it, up in the air. It'll be growing at a higher, growing 10 feet or 20 feet up in the air off the side of a snag. Another widely sought after edible mushroom. That's a decomposer. All right, here's another decomposer, which is a widely, another choice edible. This is the Sporasis Crispa, which is grows in the old growth forest. As you can see here, some of the specimens can be quite large. This, like a lot of the conchs, the size of it is really dependent on the tree that it's growing on. So the bigger the tree, the larger the fruit body will be. And in this case, it's growing in an old growth forest, and so it's a very large specimen of it. People love to eat this one, and if you find one, you've got yourself enough food to last a week or more. Cauliflower mushroom is the common name for this. So now I'm going to talk about a different feeding strategy, different type of mushroom, and again, focusing on an edible species. These are the parasitic mushrooms, and parasitic fungi are unique in the sense that they grow off of something that's living. And so rather than growing on a dead wood or dead material, this is actually taking over a live mushroom in this case and growing over the top of it. What you see here is, again, it's a rush mushroom, which is a common cap and stem mushroom, but this one has been colonized by the lobster mushroom, which is Hypomyces lactiflorum. And that is a mushroom that has taken over and is growing around the mushroom and changing it and making it and basically consuming the gills, some rudimentary gills where there have been gills, it's not been parasitized. Now, the other thing you'll notice is you've got this complete structure is covered in this red. That's the lobster fungus that's taken over. And then when that lobster fungus releases spores, you can see these spores, which are deposited right around this. They're a white powder that's come off of the mushroom, and it's deposited onto the forest floor, so that next season, when more russulas start to come up, they will encounter these spores, and then those spores will parasitize the russula. Now, in the case of parasite, it takes an edible mushroom that's maybe not so good, and it turns it into a choice edible. So this is the case of a parasite that it's a good thing from the edible mushroom perspective. Here's another parasitic mushroom. This is a type of it's sort of like a club fungus, and it starts off as this kind of yellow club with a pink top to it, and then as it grows older, it sort of fades into a black. And this type of mushroom is parasitic on underground truffles. And here's another example of a different species, which is also parasitic on the Laphomyces. Here you see the actual truffle where the parasitic fungus growing out of it. This has been dug up, and you can see where the skin of the truffle is this gray brownish color, and then this is the stalk of the parasite, which is growing out of it. This is Laphocordyceps, and let's see. Okay. This, I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the other uses of mushrooms, and I didn't quite know where to fit this in, but I do want to talk about it, which is that one of the fun things about mushrooms is that there are certain species which produce really nice fabric dyes. And in this case, I've got a couple of different species here left that are good fabric dyes. And here's a shot of some of the different colors that you can get out of different mushrooms if you, and that's a whole workshop in and of itself, but I just wanted to touch on the fact that as well as edible mushrooms, there's also other uses of mushrooms that humans can have here, which is the production of beautiful colors that can be made through dye mushrooms. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about some of the ecology of mushrooms and some of the different species which are relying on mushrooms in the environment. We have depicted here several different invertebrates like slugs and fungus gnats and things that when you most of you maybe have picked up a mushroom and cut it open and found it to be wriggling with maggots. Those are all species that are living off of eating the mushrooms. You can see here in the bottom left, so this is a slippery jack that has been munched on by some mammals. So there's a lot of mammals that eat mushrooms. Many of the mushrooms that are out there are underground mushrooms, and we call them truffles, and these are species that rely solely on being eaten as a way to disperse. When they mature, they will start to smell and they'll attract critters to come. The critters will dig them up and eat them as they defecate. That will move the spores around the environment. Here's a unique species that's been from the monument in our area here, Sedicula pulvinata, which is a rare truffle, an underground mushroom. Now, I want to talk a little bit about food webs, and this is a fungus here, and the truffle fungus is eaten by squirrels. Flying squirrels are a major herbivore, fungivore. They are one of their main sources of food is fungus. They glide down and they sniff the mushrooms that are underground and they eat them, and then they in turn become food for spotted owls. And then the spotted owls are, so basically what I'm trying to depict in this slide is the fact that everything's interconnected between the trees and the fungus and then the different animals in our forest. And this happens to connect into one of our more iconic bird species in our environment, the northern spotted owl. Other animals will eat mushrooms. Some animals, deer, they sort of will eat them when they find them. They eat a lot of other stuff, but we would consider them to be a facultative fungivore. So they just kind of eat when they can find them. Then there are other species like the redback vole here, which are obligate fungivores, and they rely on eating the underground mushrooms. And the redback vole is generally only found in our older forests, and they consume the underground truffles. So another interesting aspect of fungal ecology is the fact that certain species will be found in the spring at around melting snow. The melting snow is a source of water. When the environment warms up and the snow starts to melt and it gets into the soil, you'll get a flush of what we call snowbank fungi, and these are species that are associated with melting snow, and that's a unique group of species that are about to be found prolifically in our forests here in another month or so once the once the snow starts to melt. And so as we go into spring, we'll be encountering out in the forests these snowbank fungi. Also in the spring, you have the fruiting, the fruiting ascomycetes, and these are commonly found in the spring. And there are quite a variety of them out in the forest, including morels, different types of elfin saddles and such. Yeah, so I think I'm getting to the end of my time here. I was gonna talk about lichens, but I think that I will just, I think I filled up my 50 minutes here, so I wanna pass it along to Deb. Let me see here if I can, yeah, I don't really have time, I guess, to go into, I wanted to talk about lichens, but we'll have to save that for another day because it's time for Deb, and I don't want to run into her. So I'm gonna
good, John. Thank
okay.
you.
What do I do here? Do I share?
So stop the share screen and we'll get back.
Okay.
Perfect. And
Did I stop it?
Questions on lichen, you know, we can save that for the Q&A. So not all hope is lost.
All right.
All right. Well, when you are stopping the share screen, I will go ahead and introduce Deb. So I just want to remind everyone that if you do have a question, please enter them into the Q&A box. I will be monitoring that for questions. I did see a few questions come in through the chat box, so I'll make sure to get those rolled over to the questions. But please, if you do have a question, enter them into the Q&A, and we'll cover as many as we have time for. So with that, I want to introduce our second guest of the evening, Deb Van Poolen. She is with Biodiversity Arts, and she is here to talk about a new art project she is working on. So let me go ahead. I have some slides for her and share my screen.
Hello, everybody. So I'm so grateful for biologists that help me with all of these projects that I do that are the biodiversity posters. And the first one that I started was on the butterflies, and the photos that I used to make that poster were from John Villela, who we just heard talk about the fungi. And I've done 5 of these biodiversity posters so far, and for each one, I'm completely dependent on the help of biologists like John, who volunteer their time to make sure that I know what species to include. They often share their photos for those species. So Allie, are you pulling up that slide?
Hey, John, can you stop your screen share? Because I can't share mine until you stop on your end.
Maybe he took a little break.
Okay, let's see. No, I'm here. I'm just, oh, stop share. Okay, sorry about that, everybody.
No, it's fine. No worries.
Okay.
All right, guys, hang in there with us. Here we go. And there you go, Deb.
So thank you so much, Allie and KS Wild and Friends of the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument. I'm really grateful for all those organizations and for this time to talk to y'all tonight. And John, I have to say, your presentation blew me away. It was incredible. So I'm pretty excited to hear about lichens from John and to see his questions be answered. So I'm going to try to fly through these slides. Honestly, I think it's pretty straightforward. Like I said, I'm dependent on the biologists And so John gave me the idea to do this first poster, which you're seeing now, the butterfly diversity in the Cascade Siskiyous. So Allie asked me to just talk a little bit about the process of making these posters. So you just saw that first poster. Now this is the painting for the second butterfly poster that I did. And below the painting, you see there's a couple of sketches. Now there's an up close picture of a sketch. So I have an idea of the species and I want to set them in a certain setting. And that's the picture of the, that's a sketch for the fish poster. And the next slide is of the painting, that's the painting for the Klamath River fishes poster. So I worked with biologist Michael Parker on that painting. And now here we're looking at an arrangement of sketches that I've done for this next poster, which is going to be on fungi of the Pacific Northwest. And we're so excited to work on this one. John's been helping me. He's provided me with loads of photographs. As you know, there's thousands to choose from. So he's given me about 80 or 90, and we're going to try to include somewhere around 60, maybe 70 different species in this painting. And so what you're looking at right now is a thumbnail sketch is on the top, kind of the overall composition for the upcoming piece, which is large. So there's a close-up picture of that. And I've done 2 thumbnail sketches, and this is the one that doesn't have really a forest scene. It looks like you're on the edge of the forest, and then all the species are going to be down below. The mountain in the background will be either McLaughlin or Mount Shasta. There's a noble polypod there. You see the huge one featured, just like John talked about. Almost all those discussed will be in this poster, except for the teeny tiny ones that he talked. So this is the other thumbnail sketch that shows a forest scene with several different trees in the background. And again, there'll be a mountain in the far distance. But as John talked about, so you see in this sketch, there's a white area, that's a snowbank. And so lots of those snowbank species will be there. There'll be a cross-section area where you'll see through the soil and you'll be able to see the bolites, as well as a couple of the types of mushrooms that are actually parasitic. They're growing off of the bolete mushroom. There will be species growing on wood and logs and needles. And then there's going to be some species also that have a really long stalk going underground. Then there's a bunch of the photos that John has sent to me. So, you know, John will send me the pictures on the computer. I get them printed out. He comes over and writes down the names of them on the back, and then he grades them 1, 2, or 3, depending on importance. So all the number 1s have to be in the poster. Number 2s, I try to put all those in. If we don't have space, some of the number 3s don't come in. If the number 3, though, is if it's a really brightly colored mushroom, it goes in. So I really like to include the really brightly colored ones. As John mentioned, we're a hot spot of the coral mushroom. And so we're going to have a lot of the different really brightly colored mushrooms that are the coral mushrooms in the poster, as well as several different edible types, because people really like to know which ones are edible and what they look like. So I think that's the end of, and there you see so there's a gold gesso on the canvas. So the upcoming mushroom painting will be 8 feet long and 2 feet tall in order to have this really wide space to show all these mushrooms that are growing, you know, basically pretty close to the ground or on the ground or on something that's on the ground. And then there'll be, you know, a couple snags that will show mushrooms growing up on the snag. So yeah, that's my little presentation, and I am happy to answer questions if folks have them, but I'm really excited to give some more time to John to talk about the lichen and go on with more details. Thank you for this opportunity again, Allie.
Oh my gosh, Deb, of course. Thank you so much for all of your artistic posters. weaving together nature and art and activism. I love it. I'm really excited for the next mushroom poster. Well, I just want to say thank you, John. Thank you, Deb, so much. Thank you, Lisa and the friends for co-hosting with us. And now it's time for some Q&A. So let me get the first question. Okay, John, it's for you.
All right.
From Anonymous.
Okay.
How long is the growth period for Primordia to spore release?
So that's a great question. And basically the leading up to the Primordia, when you have the feeding stage of the mushroom, when it's when it's actively growing into that mycelial network, that can take a long time. And then you can also get that phase where it's in a sclerotia, so that's that compacted form. That can be for a long time. But to answer your question, going from a Primordia to a full-grown mushroom, that's generally a much shorter period. So that can be anywhere from less than 24 hours on some of the smaller mushrooms. You'll notice oftentimes after our first rain in the fall, there'll be mushrooms that are popping up the next day, some of the little mycenas and some of those types of things. And then some of the bigger ones, it can take longer. But if you remember back to that slide that I showed, when you go from Primordia around to the full-grown mushroom, that's generally happening very quickly. A matter of a day to several days, depending on which mushroom it is. That's the quick phase. And I would suggest people check out some of the time-lapse images that you can find on YouTube and that sort of a thing, that kind of depicts that phase of it, because it goes pretty quick. I mean, you can't quite see it with your by watching the mushrooms, but if you come back the next day, they'll be bigger than they were the day before. And that's because all of the conditions are finally right in terms of the moisture and all of that, so that when you get this influx of rain or moisture, then they're able to just absorb that and then grow quickly. So unlike a plant which grows and builds tissue and grows from the tip, the mushroom will, in its primordial phase, will have all of the cells of the full-grown mushroom are there. They're just in a compacted form. And then when the water comes in, it's like one of those little, those little sponge toys that you get out of the vending machine, you throw it in water and it grows like that. It's sort of like that, where it'll grow from that primordial phase to the full-grown mushroom quickly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I really like to hunt for Matsutakis. Is that true for Matsutakis?
Yeah, Matsutakis are one of the more compact types of mushrooms. They have some really dense flesh. They don't quite grow as quick as some of the little mycenas and that, but same thing, they grow quickly. Yeah, once it starts to rain and the moisture becomes available, then all of a sudden they'll be there. You can walk down a trail one day and they're not there, then the next day they'll be there, Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So do you remember that picture of the mushroom with the little hairs on the
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So someone asked, it looks like the droplets on the side. What are those?
Yeah, so that I actually took that because it was so cool. It was like it was actually dew. That's dew. That's not part of the mushroom. So I thought it was pretty neat that it had collected the dew. So that's just water from the fog of the fall time.
It looked like the dew was attached to some kind of branches.
The branches are the mushroom, and then actually when you see it in its dry phase, there is a little tiny like ball on the end of that branch. But the picture I showed, they had gathered the, they had gathered the dew. So that's not really the, that's a glamour shot I took because it was so cool.
Gotcha. Yeah, that came in from Michael Moore. Thanks, Michael.
Oh, okay. Mhm.
Kim asked, are bolites considered snowbank mushrooms?
So there are a lot of different bolites. They're bolites, and it just depends on which species it is. There are some that will grow after. I'm trying to think off the top of my head which ones would be considered snowbank mushrooms. There are some that grow in the spring and grow after as the snow's melting. Bolites are also kind of unique in the sense that they come out early in the fall. There's quite a few of them that come out even before the rains come. And
like queen bolites, they're around here a lot.
yeah, and even you'll get like the summer fruiting ones like the Rex Verus, and some of these ones that come out kind of in the high summer. But they're high up in the mountains, and it's finally at that point where there's moisture and it's not freezing and that sort of a thing. And so whereas the spring mushrooms will be mostly gone in the lowlands, those higher elevations will start to have interesting species at that time.
Great, just like the wildflowers. They go
Yeah,
up
exactly.
in elevation as the summer heats up. Very cool.
Yeah.
Oh, right. So let's see here. Okay, Tom asked, what is the time duration and or life cycle? Oh, I guess that was the first question, from spore to liberation. So we just went over that. Okay, this is from Laura. Is it damaging to the forest ecology to harvest edible mushrooms? I'm sure there's ethical ways to harvest. That's really important probably to cover.
Yeah, that's a great question. I should have talked about that in the lecture. But so the way I like to think about it is you have to think of this organism as in the whole self of the organism. So you have to remember that there's this vast network of mycelium that's under the ground or in the trees, in the wood. And that's really the part of the mushroom that's the main component of the mushroom. And then the fruit body, which is the mushroom, that is generally only around for a short period. And once the spores have started to get released, I mean, they call them mushrooms because they turn to mush pretty quickly. So I think that in terms of the ethics of harvesting mushrooms, and there's been some studies on this, you're not really harming the fungus by picking the mushroom. There's probably more harm that's done by compacting the soil as you're walking up to the mushroom, because you're compacting that soil, and then that mycelium, you're potentially damaging that mycelial network. So the act of picking the mushroom, once the cap is open, once the spores have started to be released, there's no evidence that that's damaging to the mushroom or to the environment. I think that just maintaining the light touch in terms of your, as you're walking through the forest, that's probably the main consideration.
Thank you. And a follow-up to that, Gail asked, when you pick a mushroom, should you shake it to spread the spores?
So I just want to go back to that question again, because I would not, I think that where you would be damaging is if you were picking things like the noble polypore. That's a perennial conch that, we definitely don't want to pick any of those. There's some of the mushrooms that, I didn't talk about this in the slideshow, but if you cut open one of these perennial conchs, you'll see the growth rings inside, and some of these can be 50, 60 years old, depending on how long. So I was thinking mostly about edible fleshy mushrooms when I answered that last question. So don't pick the perennial conchs, though those that will be damaging. In terms of spreading the spores are being spread no matter what you do. You couldn't stop the spores from spreading. Shaking it, that might spread some spores, but I don't think it's doing anything more than what it would be just in and of itself. I don't know that that's like, I don't know that that's helping anything or hurting anything, you know?
Yeah. Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have 2 more questions, unless
Okay.
someone else would like to ask a question. So from Michelle or Michael, what are the types of mycorrhizae associated with Oregon Gary oaks? Are they any indicator for prairie health or used in restoration of oak prairie woodlands?
So the Gary oaks have their own unique suite of species that grow with them. There are quite a few. If you want to find a really high diversity of mycorrhizal fungus that are really unique, go hang out with the oaks. You're going to find some unique species there. I'm not an expert on the restoration ecology of trying to grow oak and mycorrhizal partners. Many of the mycorrhizal species are pretty cryptic, and so I'm not sure about the restoration ecology, but I do know that there are many. The oaks have their, just like with a lot of other taxa groups, with lichens, with gall wasps, with fungus. The oaks, Gary oak has its own community, and it's unique, and it has its own community of mycorrhizal fungi.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and many of them are undescribed because we're just now starting to realize how unique they are. Darlene Southworth and Jonathan Frank and some of those folks at Southern Oregon University have worked a lot on the oak mycorrhizal fungi, and they would know the specifics about what species there are. But yeah, there's a unique cohort for sure.
Great. And Michelle, I'm sorry, I recognize your name. That's a Michelle. So thanks, Michelle, for that question. And then we have another one. And then Deb came in here with a few more questions. So if you would be so kind, John, just to stick around for a few more minutes. Awesome. So I found a sclerotia. Did I say that right, John?
Sclerotia, yeah.
Sclerotia, okay. I found a sclerotia a few weeks ago in my garden where I was digging for a new vegetable bed. I dug them up, relocated them, and buried them. Will they reestablish themselves?
I would say a sclerotia has a better chance of reestablishing than a primordia would, because the sclerotia is already, and it depends on the species, of course, but the sclerotia is kind of the resting phase and it's not actively growing. So I think there's a chance. Yeah.
Cool. And then Deb here, let's see. She asked, which types of mushrooms have mycelium?
All mushrooms.
All mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
Mycelium web of life. Second question is just about, what did she say here? Is lichen considered a type of fungi?
Well, maybe we can do a whole workshop on lichens, but lichens are a type of fungi. Yes, they are a fungi that has an intimate symbiosis with a photosynthetic algae or bacteria. So they are definitely fungus, and most of them are of the cup fungus type, which is the ascomycetes, the ones that produce their spores out of the upper surface through the tubes that I was showing at the beginning of the slideshow.
Gotcha. Well, John, maybe we're going to have you on before the end of our Live Where You Live event series and talk about lichen.
You'd have to have 2 hours for that.
Yeah, right. Well, if you guys are all going to be here with us, all you attendees out there, then we'll make it happen. So I can't see you attendees, so I know you're there though. So thank you for being here. And we just got someone that said 2 hours is fine. So, and someone else said, yes, make it happen. So, all right, you guys, we'll try to make it happen. With that, that's the end of the questions. So thank you all for your thoughtful questions and your awesome responses, John.
Well, thanks, Allie, for having us.
Yes. I hope you all enjoyed it. It looks like you did. I'm getting some great responses in. Lots of people are saying, thank you so much. So thank you all for being here. And just one more reminder, sign up for our event next month with Dana Ross on butterflies and moths. You don't want to miss that one. And thank you all. Thank you, John, Deb, Lisa.
Thanks, Allie. Yeah.
All right, you guys. Well, with that, I want to say good night to everybody. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Allie.
Thank you.